topic is going to be using price data to make more money. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you guys to get us started.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to kick us off this week. Camille got us started last week. That was actually her extension presentation debut. I thought she did an awesome job, and now she's an old pro, so you don't have to be so nice in the evaluations as you were. No, just kidding. We're going to cover price data this week, and this comes out of one of those questions that it's the question that we get asked most frequently, which is, what should I charge for my product? What's a good price for my product? And then part of the reason is for some of the resources we have later on that we're known for, that's part of it. But I think it's also just this thing that's on people's mind. And it can get more complicated down the line. But to start out, it really doesn't have to be a terribly overly complicated question. And so we're going to try to keep it simple, but also useful and informative tonight. And before we get started, again, I'm Brett Wolf and my colleague Camille Dant. We work with the University of Kentucky Agricultural Economics Department. Our information, our email addresses are here if you want to contact us at any point for more questions or follow up or anything like that. We also work with the Center for Crop Diversification, which is a specialty crop. It used to do more research, but now a specialty crop extension center focused on providing marketing information, pricing information, and production information for a wide variety of things. So we have price reports from farmers markets and produce auctions. We have budgets that we'll refer to those as well later. We have also publications, simple publications on 200 plus different publications about crop profiles, key considerations if you're thinking about evaluating a new crop or a new market. We have all kinds of crazy stuff on the Center for Crop Diversification website. We are a part of the UK Cooperative Extension Service. So with that pitch, and also a huge thank you to the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program for providing funding to this, to develop these presentations along with other resources that we'll share. Okay, so by and large, particularly in a farmer's market setting, the question that I usually am asking is, are you charging enough? It's relatively rare in the state of Kentucky that we come across people who aren't charging enough. It's usually that they aren't. And so as we try to answer this question, I mean, you could reframe it as, am I charging the right amount? But are you charging enough? I break it down into two sub questions that are helpful to answer to then make your decision about what you're going to charge. The first one that I'm going to be talking more about is, what is the going price for that particular product? In the same way that we have a sense, normal people at least have a sense, maybe not really rich people, but normal people have a sense of how much a gallon of milk costs at the grocery store. They have a sense of how much a car might be worth, though you might have had to adjust that in 2020 and 2021. There is a going rate, a going price that the market establishes. And if it's been around for a while, that means people probably pay for that, and they won't pay a whole lot more than that. In farmers markets, the data for that information can be harder to come by. So we're going to try to just look and see if we can get a few pieces of information to pull together to figure out what the going price is. And then the second question, which Camille will be talking more about, helping just to think through, is how much does it cost you to produce that product, to get that product all the way to market? Because ultimately, if you are here and in the interest of making money, your cost factors the majority of whether or not you can afford to grow something or how much you might be interested in charging. So I said it doesn't have to be complicated. To me, these two simple breakdown questions are the basis for all of our discussions about pricing. So just as a reminder, this fits into a broader conversation here. In our marketing basics, and I think in social media basics, we talked a little bit about these 4 Ps of marketing, making sure you understand the product that you're selling, how it's special, how it's unique, how it's valuable to consumers, the place that you're selling it. There's differences between rural and urban markets. There's differences between retail, direct to consumers, like a retail farmers market, as compared to Walmart, for instance. There's just differences, and that's going to affect the price that you charge. And of course, we're going to be talking about price tonight. The last one, promotion of telling people. The reason I put this up here is not just because I like all the pretty colors. It's because we have to remember that the price is not this piece of data, this information that we just sort of pluck, out of nowhere. It's all based on contextual factors. It's based on what's going on around you. So don't go too in depth on this, but understanding what the product is that you're selling is fundamental to all marketing. What I mean by that is you don't just necessarily grow strawberries or apples or lettuce. You're growing something that maybe was locally grown. You'll recognize this from the social media basics class, but something that's locally grown, maybe establishes a relationship with the farmer. It may offer something like transparency if the people, your customer, want to know what was sprayed on it or what, some other information they might be looking for. And above all, they're often looking for high quality, freshness, the freshness that a local product can offer. It has a lot of cachet for people. All of this to say, when you offer your product at a farmer's market, understand how it's different from the other things that are available to your consumer, at the grocery store or something like that. In other words, don't try to compete with the grocery store on price. Unless, there might be something crazy going on. In general, you are selling a different product, and part of your marketing, to back up to the part of your promotion plan, is explaining what that value is to your consumer. And that happens ahead of time. It happens at your stand or in person, but just understand that the product that you're selling may be a premium quality. It may be something special, and chances are it's more expensive for you to produce as compared to some of your competitors. So make sure that you understand what your product is and keep that in mind when you go to set your prices. So to that point, trying to answer that first question, what's the going price? This is a screenshot of our Center for Crop Diversification website. And it's our greatest hits page, basically. So these are the price reports. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see it says price reports and all those different sub-genres listed there. We offer, most pertinent to this group, we offer Kentucky Farmers Market price reports, and we offer those every week during the season. And we've also done some secondary kind of averaging and stuff that I'll talk about later in a 3-year average report. And we'll have a new one of those out soon. This kind of reminded me I need to really get on putting out a new one because of the fun, crazy prices the last few years. But we also have these for Kentucky produce auctions. If you all are familiar with those, it's just another piece of information that might help you understand what the going rates are and how and why the prices at your market are playing out the way that they are. Particularly a couple of years ago when there was a big group of people, in 2020, a big group of people got into reselling product. And so the produce auction price reports, that's what a lot of folks like that use, or a lot of folks use that for. But it also just helps you understand what the supply looks like in the state and all that kind of fun stuff. There's another place you can get information, which is from the USDA Ag Marketing Service. And this is going to be, to me, like a secondary informing piece of information. It's related primarily to like helping you understand what retail prices look like more in those grocery store settings. Now, I would take that, take all of that with a grain of salt, but also it may surprise you sometimes to see just how expensive stuff is at the grocery store. So they generate these national retail reports. You can download these for free from the USDA, or you pay your taxes, and the USDA does a lot of different things, including these. You can see I downloaded this one a while back, but these are issued every week. And as you go through them, it'll actually list, okay, this is what the advertised prices were for each of these different commodities at grocery stores. Now, again, this isn't going to be like, okay, the grocery store price was this, that means it's, that's what I'm going to use. It's just another piece of supplementary information to say, wow, at the grocery stores in the Southeast, tomatoes were going for $1.99 a pound this week. Maybe my $1.50 a pound price isn't necessarily all that unreasonable, and raising into $2 wouldn't be that crazy, or maybe even $2.50. Who knows? Camille's going to try to twist your arm and get you to raise your prices later. She's going to talk about the effect that raising prices can have. But this is just another piece of supplementary information. I think for my money and time, our CCD reports are probably the main place I would spend my time, particularly we have a new one of these. It's actually, and the data that I have in here is from the newer one that ends in 2018, but these 3-year average reports. And so I thought we might just take a quick look at some of this information and just see, these are from a presentation I did earlier this year about small fruits in Kentucky. And what I usually do when we're in person and we're not, sitting and staring at each other's blank screens, we'll kind of have a conversation about this. But to me, this just provides an opportunity to do a little bit of interpretation and to have a ballpark sense of where prices are. Remember, what's that going rate? And so for blackberries, for instance, this is a per pint price at Kentucky farmers markets. You can see over the course of the season, these three differences. And so the yellow line is 2020. So that's really our, like, for most of these things, this is going to be our outlier. And in this case, it is very different. The blue and the green line, the 2019 and 21 prices were pretty similar. Started off lower and then kind of gradually scaled up. Whereas in 2020, early on, supply chain stuff, people freaking out, etc. The prices for blackberries were considerably higher at Kentucky farmers markets that year. But the longer term data can help us to see that if you're pricing your blackberries somewhere in the $3.50 to $5 a pint range, you're not, crazy off the charts, out of nowhere. You may end up able to charge more if your market will support those prices. This is just, again, to a little bit of a reality check of, no, we're not going to give them away for $2.50, and no, we're not going to charge $33 per pint. Right? It's just to get us, what's the going price, to get our heads in that realm before we then look at our costs and make some associations about that. Here's some other information about blueberries. This one was kind of odd. Blueberries had more of their year last year price-wise, in 2019 price-wise, than the last couple of years. 2021 was a little better for blueberries. These can vary just depending on the markets that are reporting with us. But that was pretty interesting. Strawberry prices in early 2020 were off the charts. I mean, I went back and triple checked this when I put this together. And it was established markets. These are the same markets that were reporting the red or the blue and green lines were reporting those early prices in 2020. But you can see even in 2021, I personally think 2020 pushed people to raise their prices because everybody had hung out at $5 a quart is the price. And 2021, it was like, everything's crazy. And so I think there was an adjustment in 2021 that maybe should have happened a little bit earlier. So again, these things are, not this exact chart, but charts like this are available to you on the CCD site. And we also report these individual prices from a bunch of different markets every week during the season. So as you're reporting your price or thinking through your prices and looking at them, go and consult this kind of information just to see where you are. I have talked to multiple producers, very successful producers who tell me we don't even really look at the CCD prices anymore because they're all way too low. All the markets that report with you are way too low based on what we can sell things for. And that doesn't hurt my feelings. I'm just reporting the reality that's out there. But it does tell me there are frequently opportunities to raise prices. And again, we'll talk about that here just in a little bit more. You notice the change of background color. We're no longer in the produce or in the farmer's market realm. We're now in the realm of produce auctions. So the prices are a little bit lower per unit. They also look a little bit, with the exception of the yellow line, which was the main first COVID year, 2020, which was the best year for produce auctions probably ever as far as sales go. The overall, we would expect this, where prices kind of start a little higher, they dip down in the middle, and they come back up. They stayed high the whole time in 2020. Again, kind of a similar story here. Really super crazy high prices in 2020, back to reality to some degree in 2021, though not crazy, And again, same story. So the point here is, there's a couple of things, and I'll show you another slide here in a second that demonstrates this a little bit more. But this type of information is available on our website. You can download the reports. This is what the actual reports look like. They have information about the different crops. This is from the Farmers Market Report 3-year average, and it'll give you yearly average prices, like for the whole season. Going back several years, a little bit of interpretation down below in the notes section. And so this is for carrots, a couple of things that are notable here. In general, urban prices for urban markets tend to be higher than rural markets. We probably would expect that. There's a little more volatility all over the place in the carrot market in rural spaces. They also stop more or less in July in rural markets. Could be a number of reasons for this. If you feel like you have an interpretation about carrots, drop it in the chat. Love to see it. I think part of it might be the rural garden comes on. So things like carrots, people aren't really as excited about because they've got carrots or they planted those or whatever. It could be that there could be coincidence. It could, but if we're trying to interpret something out of this, there could be an opportunity in rural markets to grow carrots. It just kind of depends on the context. But you can use this information to again see asking $3.50 for that bunch or $3 for that bunch, even in a rural market may not be so crazy. Okay, so we're just trying to get the context for what is the going price. Here's another one. This is for tomatoes here. And the urban prices, to me, there's not, I do see a little bit of that kind of like it, I guess you'll are backwards for me, but it starts high at the beginning of the season and then gradually goes down across the whole year. In the previous years before this, it was even more apparent, like the prices for tomatoes were just flat across the whole season. And so some people were just making decisions to price their product at the early time when there's fewer tomatoes, the same as when there's a ton of tomatoes available at the market. There could be a number of reasons why you might want to do this. And if you're doing it strategically, I'm all for it. Like if you know I'm going to price it this price, establish a relationship with my customers demand that the price stays the same the whole year. Okay, cool. If you're just doing it because, I mean, not laziness, but just because you don't want to think about it, you might think about pricing a little bit higher earlier because you tend to get more losses. It's more slow. There's less supply available. We would expect prices in the world of economics, we would expect prices to look a little bit more like this. This is from that same time period at Kentucky produce auctions. We see the gray line is our prices and the bars are the amount of product, the quantity of product. And so when there's not much product, prices are high. When there's a ton of product, prices are low. This is more what we would expect, but crazy farmers markets are a crazy place in a number of ways, most of which I absolutely love. And this is one of them where some people do just have a seasonal price for the same thing, even if it is more difficult or it's rarer earlier on. And so this kind of brings me to the end of my section here, which again, we're trying to cover here, what is the going price? What is the ballpark thing that we can look at and say to ourselves, okay, we're like not unreasonable here. We may be able to push a little bit higher. I'm going to turn over to Camille in just a second to talk about the cost side of things, which to me is every bit as big, if not a more important part of that. There was one other thing I was going to say. Camille, did you have any comments on the first half before I turn it over to you?
Nope, I don't have any comments.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you. It gave me just enough time to remember what I was going to say. So one of the ways that you can use this kind of information, and a very common way that I see it used, is to, in those discussions between members of a market about whether or not the market is going to set a set price or a price floor or whatever. And I know that this happens variably depending on what market you're at, but a lot of markets have a conversation that our tomatoes are at $2.25 this year or this week or whatever. And you either, in some markets, you just can't go below that, which I totally get. In some markets, you can't go above or below, which I don't necessarily understand exactly what the thinking would be on that. But these things can help inform those conversations and those decisions about, because we report on, throughout the course of the season, probably 50 to 60 different crops on a weekly basis. And then our average reports, I think, have 18 or so of the most common ones. So there's a lot of information available. I have a story. There's a market in Southern Kentucky, and it was a price reporter, does an awesome job with us. And I was talking with her, and she was kind of kicking around the idea, this has been a couple of years ago, at their market, she noticed that they're selling green onions, you know, obscure, but a staple of a lot of parts of the season in Kentucky. And she noticed that their vendors were pricing their green onions for $1 rather than what everybody else in the market seemed to be doing was $2 a bunch for those. And she'd been kind of arguing with them for a while, but she approached them with now data in hand, information. Here's these price reports. I'm telling you, look, they list the county names where all these different people are selling, and these people aren't that different from us. We should try to charge $2 a bunch. And I don't know how much protesting she got or didn't get, but I like to imagine it was a lot just because it makes the story more dramatic. So they raised the price from $1 to $2. That week, they still completely sold out of green onions, and everybody made twice as much money as they would have the other way around. And she was so happy about that. And that made me really happy. I mean, you get kind of lost in, it's like, oh, this is a quirky thing, a small market, green onions, but it makes a huge difference. I mean, that could literally be the difference of $50 or $100 in your pocket more, and nobody's upset about it. Like the customers are like, yeah, the green onions are great. $2, that seems like what everybody's charging. That seems probably like what's going on at the grocery store or whatever. We tend to, as producers, or you all tend to, as producers, from what I see, undervalue your product all the time. Undervalue your labor, all that kind of stuff. And I don't say this in any kind of chiding way or anything like that. I'm just saying it because I care, and your customers care, and they want to see you around, and they want to see you be able to do this. And so thinking about your pricing and thinking about maybe raising it, are you charging enough? It's a really close topic to my heart, because I think there's a lot of folks who could be doing even just a little bit better from minimal changes, minimal shifts, minimal price changes. And that's a little bit of what Camille's going to be talking about. So again, my email stuff's on here if you want to chat afterward, but I'll turn it over to Camille, and I'll stop sharing so she can advance her own slides.
I'm gonna share. All right. Brett, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so Brett had mentioned before that the Center for Crop Diversification has enterprise budgets. So they have some for both small and large scale fruits and vegetables. So it lays out your fixed and variable costs per each crop. So you can adjust the numbers and play around based off of what you're using as a producer. Just as it says, it's pre-filled with ballpark example expenses. So it will give you your return on profit. And again, it's a more of an estimation. If you have the exact numbers that you're using, that's great. It should, be accurate. But again, just like in these examples that we're getting ready to have, it's just a ballpark estimate. So most producers would want to use the small scale budgets that they offer. So then we move on. So here is an example of kind of where we can look at for setting prices. And again, we will reiterate that these are just estimates. So just know that these were set as examples. So for this first slide, it's showing that the total rough costs of an operation. This example is over a 10-week period. So just keep that in mind as I go through this example. And just as a little side note, down here at the bottom in red, we have the booth fee. We don't always account for this cost of booths at markets. And the cost does vary depending on which markets you're attending. So a rural market might only charge you $50 for the whole season to have a booth, versus if you come here to Lexington, the farmer's market here might charge you $2,000 to have a booth for the season. So this is not included in the example, but something to be aware of going forward, just because it can vary depending on where you are selling your product. So overall, totaling up each component of producing and selling, I'm just gonna say tomatoes in general. I feel like it's a fairly easy one to go off of, but your total rough cost is going to be $1,227.50. And your components, you've got your inputs, your plants, stakes, the labor for staffing your booth, which as an economist, in our minds, that's something you always include because you want to pay yourself. But sometimes people don't always include that. But in this example, we will include the labor for staffing your booth at these markets. So moving on, we're going to estimate the yield. So on the lower end, you have a plant that produces 15 pounds of tomatoes. So you got 50 plants that total 750 pounds of tomatoes. So for a 10-week period, you would need to sell 75 pounds each week to sell that total yield of 750. So this example starts with not so great circumstances, ranging to great circumstances, going down to the 25 pounds. So this just gives you an idea of how many pounds per week over a 10-week period you would need to sell. So looking at estimating the price of where to sell the tomatoes at, so starting with the first line, we are going to start with selling 100 pounds of tomatoes at $1.25. So simple math, this totals for as $125 for the week, which in turn makes $1,250 over the 10-week period. So trickling down, you only sell 75 pounds of tomatoes for the week, you sell 50 pounds. And then we get into some lower numbers like 30, just for the example. And then at $1.25 price per pound, that's $37.50 a week, and then $375 for the whole 10-week period. So we're going to look back at the rough estimate of costs that I had talked about earlier. So our total rough cost for each component that goes into producing and selling tomatoes was $1,227.50. So right now, based off of the previous slide that I had just talked about, you would have to sell 100 pounds of tomatoes a week at $1.25 to cover the total rough costs of your components and turn somewhat of a profit. So now we're still selling the same amount of tomatoes, but in this example, our price per pound has gone up to $2. Again, selling 100 pounds of tomatoes in a week turns $200, and over the 10-week period, you'd make $2,000. And then going down to the bottom, the 30 pounds of tomatoes at $2, you're making $600 over the 10-week period. And this is for the 30 pounds, this is $225 more than what you were selling them at $1.25. So we're going to go a little crazy, and we're going to up the cost to $2.50 per pound of tomatoes. So again, selling 100 pounds of tomatoes at $2.50 a pound turns a profit of $2,500 over 10 weeks, which has doubled your profit from the original price of $1.25. So remember, originally we were asking $1.25, and we were only making $1,250 for the 10 weeks. And this was selling just 100 pounds of tomatoes. So here's it's just a comparison chart on each asking price we have gone over. So selling at the highest amount, the 100 pounds of tomatoes a week, you would turn a profit at each asking price. So for your 10 week at $1.25, your profit would be $22.50. For 10 weeks at $2, that jumps up to $772.50. And then moving your price up to $2.50, that is $1,272.50, and that would be your profit. So taking out the rough costs and how much you would end up making. So selling your tomatoes, 75 pounds to 50 pounds, and keeping them at a lower price, so you're in the red. So the less amount of tomatoes you're selling a week at that lower price is keeping you in the red. So it's a negative number. If it's 75 pounds, you can make a profit at the $2 mark and going a little higher at the $2.50. But once you get to a lower amount of average sales per week at 30 pounds, even at $2.50, you're still in the red right here, in which we don't want to be in the red.
Could I just interject one thing real quick? If you could back up to that last slide real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So just a couple of things that I'm taking away from this, or I'm thinking about, is that far left column, that 100 pounds, 75 pounds, 50 pounds, 30 pounds. That is not even just necessarily, that's average weekly sales. So if you grow 100 pounds a week, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to sell 100 pounds a week. And so what I see here is that slight adjustments up in prices, in addition to just ensuring more income if you sell the same amount no matter what, that 50 pounds average weekly sales, that's if we have 6 of our 10 weeks are really rainy and sales are terrible. Suddenly, if I charge $2.50 a pound, the pressure's off a little bit that I'll at least cover my losses here. The other thing that I think about is the customer side, where if I go from, let's say, I'm charging $2 a pound now, and I'd go up to $2.50 a pound, and that customer who comes up and buys three pounds to make dinner that night, 3 pounds of tomatoes, well, yeah, they're going to be out an additional, what did I say, so $1.50. But the difference that can make in terms of your viability to continue to sell them those delicious, amazing tomatoes that are special and unique and not something that you can get at the grocery store is enhanced. And so these are relatively small changes in prices. And the number of daggers that get shot at me when I go out and give this talk in places where they don't want to raise their prices tells me I know it's not that big of a deal, or it is a big deal to some people. But these small adjustments in prices, and this is just an example, it could be that your costs are very different or whatever, but those small adjustments in prices can make a huge difference in terms of profitability at the end, especially if as in all direct markets, something kind of goes wrong and people don't turn up. And so that's the main take home here is not, Camille said, charge $2.50 a pound and you can't go wrong. That's not what we're saying here. And she said that, but you got to kind of have some contingencies that things aren't necessarily always going to go great. And also, again, and she's going to cover this or maybe talk about this here in just a second, like these prices aren't crazy. No one's telling you to charge $10 a pound for your tomatoes. We're just thinking about being reasonable. So thank you. I appreciate you indulging in my interruption, Camille.
Right. So here is one of the graphs that Brett had shared with me. And again, like he had just mentioned, none of the prices on the low end or high end are absurd. So, just as it says, we have markets that sell at $1.25 per pound, and then we have some that sell at $3 per pound. It does depend on where you're selling. So in the graph, see, the rural areas is orange color. So it does tend to be a little bit lower. But in the blue, we have the urban area, and you might price your tomatoes higher since you would have higher costs associated with attending the urban markets. I mean, if you live in a rural Bourbon County and then you're coming into the Lexington Farmers Market versus going to the Bourbon County Farmers Market, you're spending more money on gas, your time, and like I had mentioned a little bit earlier, the booth price. So that's why the urban markets prices are a little bit higher than the rural markets. So then we'll move on. So here's some barriers to higher prices and what we hear. We hear that, I can't charge my neighbors that price. And I'll ask why. Why is it that your neighbors expect you to feed them homegrown produce at a loss to you? And do you want to make money doing this? And how can you deliver a high quality product at a loss? And this is just some things to think about when thinking about your neighbors and the barriers and things like that. And then another question is, this is the price we have always charged. I know especially today we are hearing about inflation and the rising costs of goods. So here is a little graph for this example. So this is just showing the value of wheat in a loaf of bread from 1980 to 2010. So it's a little dated, especially even though it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. But this just shows that the cost of everything has gone up, and it's something as simple as producing a loaf of bread. So not many are charging prices from 1980, but many are still charging prices from 2015. And if this graph is any indication, then prices are much higher from, let's see, that was seven years ago. So if this is any indication, this shows that prices are increasing each and every year. And then last, we'll go over some pricing strategies. So number one, with premium pricing, This involves pricing your product higher than your competition. So this will help cultivate a sense in the market that your product is a bit higher quality than the rest. Premium pricing can result in higher profit margins, and it can also improve brand value and perception of your products. And then bundling. Bundling is where you group several products together into a bundle and sell them at a single price. Bundling can display more value for the products that you offer overall. It focuses on the idea of customer surplus, which is the consumer believing that they are receiving a good deal on the items that are being bought together. So say in the summertime, you have tomatoes, you have lettuce and onions. So you could bundle those products together and kind of market it as, oh, here is a easy kit to make a homemade salad, and maybe even offer an idea of some salad dressing or something like that. But that is kind of an example of just some bundling. And then we have bulk pricing. So that's when you offer customers a discount when they buy in bulk. So if you want to move product, you might consider bulk pricing. So make sure that you understand the place you're selling when it comes to this. When you're in a direct market, you understand that while yes, I could sell 100 pounds of tomatoes in one swoop, or I could sell them as I normally would and make a higher profit selling all of them individually. But you don't come to these markets to sell in bulk majority of the time. So that's just something to consider. And then last, we have the loss leader. And the loss leader is when a product is sold at a price below its market cost to stimulate other sales of a more profitable good. So a good example would be pricing your tomatoes at $1 per pound, just on some sign to get people's attention. And then, so when they come to buy those tomatoes at $1 per pound, they'll also see that you're selling peaches, peppers, and other premium priced items while they're shopping. So you're setting tomatoes as your loss leader to get people in, but they're also buying other premium priced items as well. And then that is the end of our presentation. Brett, I'm not sure if you have any more comments, but here is our contact information again. If you have any more questions that come up in the next couple of days, feel free to send either of us an email. And also the Center for Crop Diversification website houses a lot of our enterprise budgets and more resources as well.
That's awesome. Thanks, Camille.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that occurred to me as we're talking through this, and it's something that we talk about a lot in the CCD in general, with some of our profiles and even the budgets too. There are times where you put pencil to paper with cost accounting and maybe comparing that to going prices and realize, actually, I cannot sell this product profitably. And that's an okay thing to arrive at. And that's where the loss leader thing can come in the context of a farmer's market, where it's like, I basically have to sell tomatoes at a loss in order to have tomatoes. But if I don't have tomatoes, nobody's coming to my booth, or whatever the product is. And so that is something that we think about too when we look at whether or not there's a market for a product in your local, in the places where you might be able to access locally. If there isn't, and you don't think there's a feasible way that you're going to be able to sell this and make money, it's okay to say, okay, I'm just not going to grow that, or I'll grow one of those for my hobby plant and leave it there. And so that, I think that is part of being a good business person, is knowing when to kind of cut your losses or avoid losses in the first place. And so if there's any way we can help you to do that, that would be awesome. You can reach out to us and we're happy to help. I do still answer the people who ask me about help with setting prices, and don't just say, oh, you should have come to my talk. But a lot of the stuff can get you started on your own before that, and you can look at some other information that's out there now too. I am dropping a link to an evaluation here in the bottom. You should be able to just click it and follow it through. It's very brief, just asking about how stuff went and your thoughts in general on that. So if anybody has any other questions, we're happy to field them.
That's a great comment you made, Brett. Just a few minutes ago, that sometimes you have loss leaders. We see that a lot in our farmers markets where people have customers, regular customers at a farmer's market, and they say, well, we have to take care of the customers. Yes, there's a kind of a philanthropic feeling there. We have to take care of our customers, but if you dig deeper, it's, well, we have to take care of our customers or someone else will. So what they end up doing is let's say a producer enjoys growing 3 crops, that they really enjoy, and it's good profit crops, but they find themselves growing 6 or 8 crops to provide that variety to kind of be a one-stop shop. And successful producers do that over and over again, and they usually have found some way to grow these other crops without it being too much of a hassle. And this whole concept of varieties at a farmer's market, it's not things that they enjoy growing, things that really necessarily don't make them a lot of money. They don't sell those in high volume, but it is a variety sort of thing to capture their customers' attention and keep their customer attention. We see that all the time. And it's one of the interesting things I try to dig at with local producers. It's like, well, what do you enjoy growing? What do you feel like is your most profitable crops? And they'll mention 1 or 2 crops right away. They won't mention the other 10 crops. They just do that to provide kind of background. And it's really interesting with local producers when you talk with them. It's usually a good discussion to have. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, well, and the funny thing is with these smaller, farmers market booths or market gardeners, there's this certain idea of like simplicity or smallness or something like that. When in reality, enterprise-wise, they're more complex than some other much larger operations as far as just what's going on dynamically. There might be a lot less volume, but I think what part of what you're touching on there, and it's with the basic stuff we talk about, like the tomatoes, and have that example costs. But the next step beyond the basics is starting to think about that entire product mix, thinking about how all of your inventory interacts. And the classic, like, if I were doing it, I know that I can grow lettuce really, really well. I've worked in horticulture, and I know that I can grow lettuce, and I know that people go crazy for really fresh lettuce. I would think about, my strategy would be, okay, I've got the tomatoes to put on top of your salad, and I'll sell you those for $2.50 a pound. But I also have this lettuce that I'll sell you for $2 or $3 a head that I'm making almost pure profit on. And that type of strategizing and understanding what your customers are looking for, that bulk thing is so funny, because there will be people who are at the Lexington farmers market, vendors, and you'll see sometimes it's like it tends to be like really hardcore old school farmers market customers will come up, and they're trying to kind of like get them to sell them a bushel of beans or something. And those people have paid a bunch of money to have a booth where they can sell it in $4 a pound or $4 a quart increments and make a ton more money per unit. And yeah, they'll sit there all day to do it. But bulk pricing is one of those funny differences. And there's some markets where it's like a lot of it's bulk, and people want to get out of there at 3, or they want to get out of there before noon or whatever. So they'll sell as much as they can to get back and do whatever they need to do. So
really interesting. I think it's 2 times in the last 2 days I had a great conversation with 2 separate producers. One producer has sold at low volume, high price direct markets, and she had also sold at pure wholesale, large volume, lower price per unit. And she just really has such a good grasp of the concept of each and the layers that they fall in. She even has a grasp of that gray area where it's restaurants that fall somewhere in between fresh market price and wholesale price. You're somewhere in between. And it's so interesting talking to producers like that. And they are truly unique and different markets. That high volume, lower price versus, direct to consumer price at lower volumes. It's just radically different. And there's another producer that was trying to decide how he wanted to get into it. Well, I came back to, it kept circling back around. Well, how much experience do you have in the horticulture world? Well, not much. I'm like, well, we might want to look at that lower volume until you kind of get a handle on it. Don't try to run before you walk, sort of thing. But and all that goes back to, it's like you have to be an investigator. You have to talk about pricing. You have to talk about experience, equipment, just everything. It's this holistic approach to, yes, it comes back to prices and what you feel like you can grow well, but It is a complex, almost like an interrogation when, we talk with people in really digging at the heart of the matter of what we produce and how we price it and how we sell it and experience levels. It all goes together. It is very interesting conversations.
Yeah, and it's another component of that wholesale versus retail conversation that I think is we sometimes overlook or maybe just kind of push to the back of our mind, is that there are people like me and Ray who have the gift of gab and can go out and talk and don't mind to kind of chat with people, and that we make pretty good customer service people because we're willing to do that. And there are some people who they don't like talking to people. They don't like seeing people. They want to drop off a pallet of green beans. And the difference in price is totally worth it to them. And so we have a publication called The Primer, and a couple of the things, it's just like a self-evaluation kind of thing. And one of them you mentioned earlier is enthusiasm. How enthusiastic are you about a particular crop or whatever? And then another one is like your skill set. What is it that you are actually good at? And there are some people that I wouldn't particularly want them fronting my, being the customer service arm to my business, but I would love to have them, managing the production side or whatever. And I think that's part of it too, is you can have the plan to go and sit at the farmer's market, but if you're going to be miserable doing it and you're going to have be high,
usually they'll send a family member that's going to be miserable because they absolutely refuse to do it.
Exactly.
It amazes me that producers that can do both well. It's like they could be a CEO of any corporation in America, any Fortune 500, if they can be both a producer and a marketer. That's a complete package. It is the golden skill set, and it is rare. Some people recognize that they're more of a producer than a marketer, or vice versa. And the ones that are most successful, they do a self-evaluation and they play to their strengths.
Yeah.
But there's very few that I've ever seen that can do both in equal measure. And it is, it's another interesting aspect of Kentucky, where we're mainly, I don't want to say we lack infrastructure, but we don't have a lot of that drop off, produce a volume and drop off at point X. We don't have a lot of that infrastructure. So we have a lot of these producers out there that also have to be marketers. Yeah, absolutely. And that's just a whole nother discussion for another series. It's just good discussion to have. Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. Well, I could talk about this all day, folks, but I know you guys probably want to enjoy some of your evening. Lindsay, what do we have coming up next week? Brett, you guys, Camille, the topic is another
Next
really,
week
really
is
good one.
just accepting more than just cash.
Yeah, so I'm so that's actually going to be a fresh face. Savannah Columbia, who is in our group. Well, I'll be on just to moral support and cheer while I'm muted, I guess. And but Savannah will be covering. I'm hoping that she's going to cover it a little bit about, or mostly about kind of like the Square and credit cards and the advantages of that, but also maybe a little bit of a nod and some tips and stuff about the EBT process and SNAP benefits and that kind of stuff. But yeah, more important than ever to think of, or a better time than ever to think about accepting more than just cash, because it's wild. But same time, same place. But it'll be Savannah.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you to you two that were presenting again this afternoon, and thank you to those that attended. Hopefully you will join us again next week. As Brett said, as you can tell from the description, it's going to be another great topic. So hope to see you then.